Hello and welcome to the Wheel of Crime podcast. This podcast where two ladies play games, mumble profanities, and laugh way too often. Also, this podcast does cover topics of sensitive nature, and as such, listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Wheel of Crime podcast. My name is Jenn.
My name is Emily.
Emily.
And yeah, we're here again for you today. Oh boy, I am the Dr. Pepper. It's not pepped me up yet.
The Dr. Pepper hasn't pepped up your step yet?
No, not yet. I slammed one back before we recorded today, and it gave me nothing but gas, no energy, so I'm a little disappointed.
Slay.
It was tasty, though.
Well, at least there's that.
It's the little things. So, Jen, how has your last week been? What would you like to share with our darling listeners of the exciting and fabulous things that you, as a person, get up to on the reg?
Well, I think once this episode goes out, Mother's Day will have just passed.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Probably, maybe.
Well, yeah. What are you doing with your mom? We were going to talk about it and then we got distracted and I really want to know.
Oh, literally at this point, I got nothing planned. I've really been struggling the last couple of years with Mother's Day and Father's Day because it's like I have their birthdays, which I try to make them feel special for, and then there's other holidays, and then there's Mother's Day and Father's Day, which is not to say that I don't want to do something for them. It's just I feel like I've kind of run out of ideas of the things that I even can do. Like, I feel what I'll probably do, because this is not something we get to do together all the time, is I might take her out shopping to some greenhouses and then buy her a funky plant from the greenhouse, because I have done that the last couple of years, and that's been kind of fun. But I think on the other hand, too, though, she kind of likes being able to curate her garden so well. It's cute. It's kind of like, wow, but who am I to make decisions for her? Am I right? So I might just do that.
I think that's a nice idea, and it's like a way to spend time together and stuff and doing something that she likes. So I think that's a good vibe.
Grab like a simple lunch somewhere, maybe. I don't know. Like I said,
Yeah.
I feel like I've run out of ideas. That's where I'm at. Father's Day is even worse because there are no greenhouses that open up around Father's Day, so I don't know what to do for that, man. But maybe I'll have it figured out this year.
Yeah, I struggle a lot more with Father's Day. Usually, like, for Mother's Day, I'll, like, go down to our hometown and take my mom out. But this year, I'm bringing her to me so she can have some brunch that is slightly better than the mediocre ones we can have in our hometown.
You mean something not from a chain restaurant or a fast food restaurant?
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like maybe what I'll do one of these years is I'll do something similar for her and take her out of town for Mother's Day. I think that'd be fun too. But for this year, because it's creep up, but you know that creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, fast.
Agree.
Yeah. I might just do my greenhouse idea, and then maybe we'll try something somewhere new for lunch. There are a couple small places that have opened up in our place of origin that do not promise to be tasty, but they do promise to be original, so I might do that.
I mean, it's worth a shot. Honestly, I'm just trying to go to our hometown less this year because I feel like last year we went back so many times in a row, and I'm just like got very burnt out about it, especially like in December. Like, I think we went back and forth like literally 5 times. And I was like, I cannot do this anymore.
See,
so
the one time
we have not.
You should come back isn't even to go to our place of origin. You should just come and visit me, and then we'll do like a little beach day or something.
See, I would love that. I think that's like the vibe.
Sit
It's
outside,
just
listen to birds, have wine, watch gossipy movies, stay up way too late, be not hungover next day, get breakfast. You tell nobody you were here, go back home.
honestly a vibe. And when we did that last summer, it was like one of my favorite days.
Yeah. Well, I think it's nice too if you are a little bit sneaky about it. I feel like there's a couple friends, you know, that I wouldn't mind, like mutual friends of ours, that I wouldn't mind coming out to visit us when you're visiting me. But, like, as soon as you start mixing in family sometimes, especially if you're not living in your hometown and you're traveling back, that's when things get weird sometimes where they're like, but your aunt who hasn't seen you in 7 years would like to schedule a visit. And it's like, okay, but, like, maybe
but
there's a reason we haven't seen each other in 7 years. That, you know, like, stuff like that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It is hard. I don't live that far away, but, like, I have previously lived further away, and it was always really challenging going back to our hometown because of that, and because of, like, everyone wants to see you at the same time, and, like, there's only so many hours in a day, and it's
Jen
just like
really struggles with being the
exhausting,
most popular girl in town.
It's exhausting. Yeah, it's true. I'm so famous and cool. There's like
famous,
a list
cool.
to
There
see
is a
me.
list. Not for
And you're
just
not
for other
on
people.
it.
Not for me though.
Well, you're on a list. I don't know.
You're like, yeah, you're actually on the shit list. It's an entirely different list.
With just you underlined in red.
Yeah, it's like the naughty or nice list, but it's just Jen's shit list. You know what? I probably deserve it, though, is the thing.
You do. Yeah.
And then, I'm trying to think, but there was something else you said, but yeah, I feel like our summer plans, I see your vision. I see what you're trying to accomplish. For myself, for this last week, what have I been up to? Mostly just trying to, like, not even compartmentalize, that's the word I was going to use, but it's more like trying to find, I think, work-life balance in a different kind of way. Because it's one thing to, like, you know, literally looking at work and being like, work versus life. But now I'm, like, looking more at it and being like, okay, but, like, what aspects of life in my work-life balance am I not paying attention to? Like, I do need to, like, try being more active, especially because I work from home and, like, other random things. So I'm really trying to, like, look at those areas and being like, okay, like, I've really been slacking on some things that would probably make me happy if I, you know, put a little bit of effort in. Yeah, like waking up slightly earlier to maybe go for a walk so that I see the sun at least once a day. Like, stuff like this, right?
It's a thought. I just signed up for a 6-week beginner's tennis lesson.
Ooh, that's fun. Now, what got you here?
Well, 2 years ago, I was going through a phase where I was like, ooh, I really want to get into tennis. So John bought me a tennis racket for Christmas, and I haven't touched it since. So I've been meaning to play tennis at some point, and then I was like looking, I was like, I don't even really know the rules of tennis though. So like that's what I feel like been like the obstacle of like me playing tennis is like not knowing that much about the sport, just like liking the idea of it.
You're trying to make from, like, whimsy to not whimsy.
Exactly. And also yesterday I bought a really cute tennis outfit that now I want to wear somewhere.
Hell
so
yeah. Okay,
so then obviously I had to figure out how to wear it somewhere. Anyways,
I think that's good though. I think that's super fun. I love this journey for you that you're setting out on. You'll have to give us updates on how you feel about tennis by the end of it.
Also, I just feel like committing, like paying like $400 to like commit to like a 6-week class, then I might actually go and exercise, which would probably be good for my health.
Right? Like, it's just stuff like that. For me, specifically the exercise component, because I feel like you and I are similar in our desire to not do it for several reasons probably, is I went for a walk with my sister the other day, and it wasn't even like that long of a walk, but dude, I was so tired. I could not catch my breath. We were not running. I was just walking the whole time, and I was like, this is rough. Like, borderline embarrassing. I was like, how did I get here? Like,
well, so I've been like trying to like increase my step count, right? So I started like earlier this year where I was like, I'm averaging like 3,000 steps a day. Like, I'm going to try and get to like 6,000 a day at least. So I've been like pretty consistently doing at least 6,000 steps. Some days more, some days like a little bit less, but like that's besides the point. So now I'm like, okay, I got up the ante. We're trying to get 10,000 steps a day consistently. But man, that's a lot of fucking steps to take.
Well, I mean,
in a day, every day.
You saw when we were at the comic convention that my average is 400 steps a day. When we were at the comic book convention, We walked 7,000 steps, and Jen's like rookie numbers, and I was tired for the next 3 days. Like, it was so bad.
Well, I looked mine updated later, and I think it was like at like 11,000 steps or something. So I think it was more. I think I just like phones hadn't updated. Like if you go back now, I'm sure it'll be more. For that day, my
husband got a warning on his phone being like, "Uh-oh, Emily's exceeded her heart rate and her steps for the day. Is she running from Godzilla?"
But also, I was wearing like the completely wrong shoes. I was not expecting to walk that much. I was wearing fucking loafers, and my dogs were barking.
I don't even remember what I was wearing. Some kind of lace-up boot, and I mean, thank Jesus for the invention of laces, because I feel like if I was wearing slip shoes, that would have been the end of me. I literally would have died.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that was me, bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like, the tops of my feet were, like, what hurt the most. Is, like, because I feel like there was, like, that pressure from, like, the loafer and, like, bending so much. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And not even just a regular loafer, a fucking platform loafer. I don't know what I was thinking.
You're like me. We gotta get those extra inches. Gotta have a dominating presence in our shoes, because we're so short.
Jesus. But anyways, we have yapped for, I think, long enough. So we should start this episode.
Yeah. Let's spin the wheel of questions so you can tell me what your story is today.
Okay. What's the craziest thing that's happened to you while traveling?
I was with my husband and we drove through a tsunami once.
Oh.
It was, or no, it might have been a hurricane. I think it was a hurricane. Hurricane Songda, when it hit the Pacific southwest. We were not aware of all these warnings that were going up about there being a hurricane, and so it was going to be really stormy. They were worried about some of the roads washing out on the coast there. We were fully taking that coastal highway, driving to LA, not a care in the world when it hit. And we were literally, we just entered, I think it was like Northern California when the storm hit. And you could not see, I don't know, like a foot in front of you for how rainy it was. But thankfully the vehicle was heavy enough where we didn't really have a lot of issues with like flooding out the road, but like little dinky cars and people like that were pulled over. Like it was a whole thing. So that was kind of scary.
You guys are just cruising along.
Well, it was scary at first, and then about 4 hours in, I kind of came to terms with my own death, and then I decided to sleep the rest of the way.
I understand that.
My nerves were frazzled by that point, and I was like, you know what? Andrew's kept us alive this long. If we end up flying off the cliff into the ocean, then that's how I go, and I at least don't want to be conscious for that. So...
whatever happens, happens at this point.
Jesus, take the wheel. Basically, yeah. And what about you?
My God. I feel like I've had a few. The first one that came to mind was when me and my husband went to Santa Barbara for the day, and there was like a tourist attraction. There's like this castle. So we drove up this like really windy, like, you know, Santa Barbara, like those like hillside roads that are like literally one lane, but like for some reason 4 cars are trying to drive on it at once down all opposite directions. And, so we're going up there, and I was, like, so freaked out, and we got up to the top, and the fucking castle was closed to the public, like, literally under construction. I was like, cool. That was scary for literally no reason. And then we ended up getting from up there, because it was under construction, we ended up getting a roofing nail in the tire of our rental vehicle, and we didn't notice until the next morning when we were trying to leave for our flight at 6 a.m. and the tire was flat, and we drove down like the 405 highway in LA with a flat tire. It was great, and then we almost missed our flight. So yeah, love that for us.
That's fair. I love how both of our experiences are vehicles or driving in America. And so much stress that at some point you just have to mentally clock out.
You're just like, you know what? It's fine. It's fine.
Everything's fine. All right. Let's spin for our next question.
All right. What is your worst experience on an airplane?
Easy. Because I've only ever been on an airplane, I think, less than 5 times in my life. It was when you and I were traveling to Europe, and we were taking a red-eye flight, which honestly is fine. I've decided I have no opinions between a daytime flight and a red-eye flight. Just
I kind of
more
prefer a red-eye.
nighttime flight.
I don't know. I kind of prefer a red-eye, to be honest.
Well, it's a lot quieter, I feel. But regardless, there was this stupid man right beside us who literally opened up his backpack and he had, I don't know, 15 bags of chips in there or something. Mm-hmm. And then just like, so that was the thing. It was a red eye. We're all trying to sleep and this man is just snacking on corn chips or whatever, literally every 5 seconds for the entire 12 hours it took us to get there. And then on top of that, he was sick. So then he's like sniffling and coughing and wheezing, literally right beside where you and I were sitting. And by the time we got off that flight, I was sick. I had not slept and I was sick. And I was like, I'm going to kill somebody. Like, oh my God.
And we named him Snack Man.
I still think about him, actually. It was the Snack Man. That's what we called him.
Yeah. See, my worst flight was that same trip, but different, like the way home from Halifax, because we had gone to this like wildlife conservatory the day before and held skunks that were, and we smelled like skunk for sure. And I was like, this is the worst day of my life.
I truthfully think I blocked it out. I don't even remember us catching our flight from Halifax.
And then that night, for some reason, my mom and my now husband decided to go to the movie A Star is Born. And I was like really unwell because I think I was just so tired and jet lagged and like not feeling great. Mm-hmm. But we went to this fucking movie anyway. And I ate popcorn and I barfed so hard outside of that movie theater. And I was like waiting for them to come out and like find me because I'd been gone for a while. I was like, please, someone just come out here and take me home. And they watched the fucking rest of that movie and I sat on the curb outside. And I was
I'm starting to notice a trend with you, by the way. It seems like when you were under great stress, you just vomit everywhere. I did not know this about you until recently either. So you've been meant to keep this a little secret.
It's not all the time, just sometimes.
I truthfully don't think I've ever vomited from stress. Nausea, yes. Vomiting, no. You were very
feel like once I get the feeling, I can't get rid of it. I'm like, it's gonna happen. I'm ready.
Also, that's hilarious that they just probably looked at each other and they're like, we have just been gone a while. She must be, I don't know, shitting or something. And you're fighting for your life in the parking lot, so jet-lagged. Oh my God.
I was like literally laying on the curb of our hometown movie theater being like, someone take me away.
Help me. Oh my
I need to go home. And then I like was so unwell that they like took me home and I just like laid in the bathtub. No water running. I just laid in the bathtub for hours being like, oh, I don't feel good.
I truthfully think that if I am remembering this correctly, I think I got home. I did not unpack anything. And then I just took a hot shower and slept for, I think, 16 hours. Like, I slept so long. I remember my husband, well, now husband at the time, boyfriend, being like, I was genuinely concerned. And I was like, I don't think I had a full good sleep that entire trip because of how strange most of our Airbnbs were, to be completely honest.
Literally same. Right. I just remember going back to your parents' house and because we were like dropping off something there or like,
and they were like, wow, you smell like shit.
Yeah. And they like were like, here, eat ghost pepper.
I remember that. And we were like, no.
I just was like, I'm unwell. I haven't had a vegetable in so long. Please. I've got scurvy in Europe.
I got scurvy in Europe. I want that on a t-shirt, actually. But let's spin for our next question.
Okay.
Number 2.
Would you ever go skydiving?
If you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said yes. Now, uh, hard maybe, leaning towards no.
That's where, okay, I feel like if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have just said no. Now I'm kind of like hard maybe leaning towards no. Like, I feel like it would be cool, but I feel like I would have a really hard time actually going through with it.
So for me, I know I would go through with it, but since being 18, I have had a couple of experiences since then. And one of them was, it might have been at West Ed, but I remember going down a water slide, and it was one of those things where, like, I was feeling pretty confident about going, like, not really all that worried about it. And I had this, like, experience where the floor dropped out beneath me and I plummeted, but I knew that was coming.
One.
Yeah, I knew it was coming and I knew to expect it, and I've done this before, but it had been a while, and for whatever reason, I could not catch my breath. Like, I had, like, a minute where I, like, couldn't breathe. And then I was like, I feel like if I went skydiving, like, I would follow through with that, but I feel like I would have such a hard time catching my breath that I'd spend the first good part of it just panicking. And I'm like, I would want to do it, but I would want the adrenaline of it. I would want the novel experience of it. I would want to enjoy experience something that is just so crazy and, like, such a unique thing to experience. And I actually don't know if at this age now I would even be able to do that. Like, I don't think I would enjoy it the same way I would have 10 years ago.
Yeah, I feel like if I had done it 10 years ago, I agree. I would have enjoyed it more, probably. Whereas now, I'm like,
And I kind of have a lot of responsibilities now. I'm like, if I break both my legs, like, that kind of would be a big problem. You know? Whereas, like, 10 years ago, I'd be like, wow, what a cool story. And I'm like, no. We do not need more cool stories. We need to live.
We've had enough.
We need to survive.
Had enough.
Right?
I've been through too much to die this way.
Yeah, I'm like, I have other ways that I would rather die. Breaking both my legs, this is not one of them.
Nah, it's just not it.
It's not in the cards for me, I hope. Anyways, but it's been for our, I think, do we have one more question or two more questions?
Last question.
Last question. Let's spin away. All right, give it to me.
Would you describe yourself as an overpacker or an underpacker for trips?
Lean towards overpacking, but actually I'm normally pretty good between overpacking and underpacking because I think too much about the different situations I might find myself in to not ever underpack. But
right.
If I do overpack, it's usually because I feel like I'll look at the weather and I'll plan for the weather, but then I forget what experiencing the weather actually feels like, if that makes sense. It's like looking at something and being like, oh, it's going to be cold, I should bring a jacket. But then you get there and you're like, it's cold, but it's manageable, right? Like, just random stuff like that. So I would say I'm normally pretty good. But I would say, if anything, I do overpack. What about you?
See, I used to be a hardcore overpacker as a child. Like, way overpacked. Now I feel like I lean towards underpacker. Almost to, like, a fault, like, in a bad way. Like, I feel like I genuinely do underpack a lot of the times, and it sucks. And I'm like, why the fuck didn't I just pack better? Like, what is wrong with me? Because, like, in the moment when I'm packing, I'm like, I don't need that. It's a waste of space. Like, I don't need that. I'll be fine. And then I get there, I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't left my entire makeup bag behind. Maybe some mascara would have been nice in this moment.
See, but the one nice thing about underpacking is most of the time, unless you're doing, like, a nature-themed trip, you're going to have places where you can buy what you need. Like, if you don't pack enough socks or enough underwear or makeup or, like, other random things. But then at the same time, it's hard because it's like, yeah, but why would I spend money on stuff that I'm not using?
Yeah. It's just, I don't know. And then because like most of the time it's like, yeah, you could rebuy it, but it's not that big of a deal where I feel like the need to, so then I just go without. But then I'm like, oh, like it would have been nice to have these few extra things, and it wouldn't have been that much extra space. I should have just brought it. But like, I think past gen just like inherently hates future gen. Like, I genuinely think that, and I don't know why. We're working on it. You know?
Well, yeah. I understand what you're saying. But like I said, maybe it's less that past gen hates future gen. I mean, she might. Like, I don't know her that way. But maybe you just need to, like I said, like come to an agreement between past gen and future gen and be like, hey, we need to be okay with buying things if we're not bringing them.
Yeah, it's true.
Or like the nice thing, if you overpack, for example, on say like socks or underwear and you're traveling, usually there'll be like a couple pairs where you're like, do I really, like, do I love these socks enough to keep them? You know? And then it's like, if no, then you just throw them away. Goodbye, socks.
Yeah. Au revoir.
Hasta la vista, baby.
It's true. But that's the end of our questions. So what do you think my story is about today?
Some woman packed too much on her trip, and her husband said, I had enough, and he went, and he decided to take her out because he was tired of carrying her heavy suitcase everywhere.
No.
I didn't think so. I don't know.
All right, well, let's get right into it. On Thanksgiving Eve, American Thanksgiving Eve, I might add, November 24th, 1971, a man carrying a black case approached the counter for Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, the man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle Airport. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses describe Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s with dark brown hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. Carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag, Dan boarded Flight 305 and took the seat 18E in the last row in order to drink a bourbon and a 7-Up from the flight attendant. There was a crew of 6 on the flight and 36 passengers aboard, including Dan, and the flight left on schedule at 2:50 Pacific Standard Time. Shortly after take-up, Dan handed a note to the flight attendant, who was sitting in the jump seat at the rear end of the airplane, directly behind Dan. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's telephone number, the stewardess dropped the note unopened into her purse. Dan then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Ooh. Oh, okay.
So she opened the note, and in neat all capital letters printed with a felt tip pen, Dan had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." So she returned the note to him, sat down as he requested, and asked quietly to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase and she saw 2 rows of 4 red cylinders, which she assumed were dynamite. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large battery which resembled a bomb. He closed his briefcase and told her his demands. She wrote a note with Dan's demands, brought it to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed her to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they happened. He then relayed to Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota the hijackers' demands. Dan requests $200,000 in a knapsack by 5 p.m. He wants 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes. He wants the money in negotiable American currency. By requesting 2 sets of parachutes, Dan implied he planned to take a hostage with him, thereby discouraging authorities from supplying a non-functional equipment. With the flight attendant in the cockpit, another flight attendant sat next to Dan to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew. So Dan then made additional demands upon landing in Seattle. Field trucks were to meet with the plane and all passengers were to remain seated while the money was brought aboard. He said he would then release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. The staff on the plane informed the Seattle Air Traffic Control of the situation, who contacted the Seattle Police Department and the FBI. The passengers were told that their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty, which is the understatement of the world. I'm just going to say.
I'm also going to say that I feel like if I was on a plane and hijacking was taking place, somebody would be suspicious. Like, people who either sit close to him, because, like, that's not fully going to be a secret to anybody.
No. Not at all. Like, I don't know how you really keep that under wraps.
Well, especially if the flight attendant's, like, sitting by this guy. Like I said, have been on maybe 5 flights in my life. But in any of them, if, like, say you and I were flying somewhere and the flight attendant was like, oh, and just sitting with one guy all the time, I'd be like, that's a little weird. Like,
what's going on with him?
Yeah, and then she leaves and a different one comes and sits by him. I'd be like,
something's going on.
Yeah.
So Donald Nyrup, the president of Northwest at the time, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled the airport to give the police and the FBI sufficient time to assemble his ransom money and parachutes and to mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Dan demanded that a flight attendant remain by his side at all times. The second flight attendant later said that Dan appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, he remarked, "Looks like Tomica down there," as the aircraft flew above it. When the parachutes were coming from McCord Air Force Base, Dan correctly noted that McCord was only a 20-minute drive from the Seattle airport. She later described the hijacker's demeanor. Dan was not nervous. He seemed rather nice, and he was not cruel or nasty. While the airplane circled Seattle, the flight attendant chatted with Dan and asked why he chose this particular plane to hijack, and he laughed and replied, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines. It's because I have a grudge." He explained the flight simply suited his needs. He asked where she was from, and she answered that she was originally from Pennsylvania, but was living in Minneapolis at the time. Dan responded that Minnesota was a very nice country, which is weird, because it's not a country. It's a state. I'm not even American, and I know that.
Maybe he was talking about the countryside of Minnesota?
Maybe.
That's weird. Huh.
So she asked where he was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. He asked if she smoked and offered her a cigarette. She replied she had quit, but accepted the cigarette anyway. FBI records note that Dan spoke briefly to an unidentified passenger while the airplane maintained its holding pattern over Seattle. In his interview with the FBI agents, passenger George Labenseer stated that he visited the restroom directly behind Dan on several occasions, which is hilarious. Like, this man has IBS.
I was gonna say that would be me getting familiar with the hijacker just because I have a bladder the size of a penny. I'd be like, oh my god, I know, I've been here like 20 times. Isn't this crazy?
Oh my god, you're hijacking the plane? That's hilarious.
That's nuts. Anyways.
I'll be right back. Mm-hmm. So, after one visit, George said the path to his seat was blocked by a passenger wearing a cowboy hat, questioning the flight attendant about the supposed mechanical problem delaying them. George said that Dan was initially amused by the interaction, then became irritated and told the man to return to his seat, but the quote-unquote the cowboy ignored Dan and continued to question the flight attendant. George claimed he even persuaded the cowboy to return to his seat. So this flight just seems like a total disaster, in my opinion.
Well, I feel like what probably happened, if I'm just, like, guessing based on what I know of human beings, this cowboy guy probably was like, why is the flight attendant favoring this, like, random fucking guy? I want my ice water and my whiskey or whatever it is that he wants.
Where's my fucking pretzels?
Yeah, beach, and he's like over there, and he's like, hey lady, why aren't you serving the rest of the plane?
What's going on here?
Right? If I had to guess, I'd imagine that's what was happening, but either way,
Most
yeah,
likely.
like you said, it seems like this place is disastrous.
So the flight attendant's version of the interaction differed from Georgia's. She said a passenger approached her and asked for a sports magazine to read because he was bored. She and the passenger moved to an area directly behind Dan where they both looked for magazines. The passenger took a copy of the New Yorker and returned to his seat. When the flight attendant returned to sit with Dan, he said, "If that is a sky marshal, I don't want any more of that." But she reassured him there was no sky marshals on the flight. Despite his brief interaction with Dan, the cowboy was not interviewed by the FBI and was never identified. The $200,000 ransom was received from Seattle First National Bank in a bag weighing approximately 19 pounds, $10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which had serial numbers beginning with L, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. So Seattle police obtained the 2 front parachutes from a local skydiving school and the 2 back parachutes from a local stunt pilot. Around 5:24 Pacific Standard Time, the parachutes had been delivered and notified Dan that they would be landing soon. At 5:46 Pacific Standard Time, Flight 305 landed with Dan's permission. The aircraft was parked on a partially lit runway from the main terminal. Dan demanded only one representative of the airline approach the plane with the parachutes and the money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via mobile stairs. Northwest Seattle Operations Manager Al Lee was designated to be the courier. To avoid the possibility Dan might mistake Lee's airline uniform for a law enforcement officer, he changed into his civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached a mobile stair per Dan's directive. The flight attendant exited the aircraft through the front door and retrieved the ransom money, and when she returned, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Dan in the last row. Dan then agreed to release the passengers. As they debarked, Dan inspected the money, and in an attempt to break the tension, the flight attendant jokingly asked Dan if she could have some of it. Dan readily agreed and handed her a packet of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. She said Dan had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his pocket, but they had each declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely debarked, only Dan and the 6 crew members remained on board. In accordance with Dan's demands, the flight attendant made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to him in the rear of the plane. While the flight attendant brought aboard the parachutes, other members of staff asked Dan if they could retrieve their purse, which was stored in a compartment behind his seat. Dan agreed and told her, "I won't bite you." Flight attendant Hannock then asked Dan if the flight attendants could leave, to which he replied, "Whatever you girls would like." So she got the fuck off the flight. Which, honestly, same.
Literally. Good call.
So when the flight attendant who had been sitting next to him brought the final parachute to him, she gave him a printed instructions for using the parachutes, but Dan said he didn't need them. A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete refueling. During the delay, the flight attendant said Dan complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, he cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Dan aboard the aircraft, but Dan denied the request. He became impatient, saying, "This shouldn't take so long," and let's get this show on the road. And he gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives: a southeast course towards Mexico City at minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, approximately 100 knots, and a maximum of 10,000 feet altitude. Dan also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered at 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. First Officer Ratazik informed Dan the configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, so the second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Dan and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Dan further directed the aircraft to take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest officials objected for safety reasons, but Dan countered, saying, "It can be done, do it," but then did not insist that he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. Dan demanded that the flight attendant he had been sitting next to remained on board to assist the operation. So let the rest of them go, but he made her stay.
Right.
Around 7:40 p.m., the flight took off again with only Dan, the flight attendant he was sitting next to, and the pilots in the cockpit. Two F-106 fighters from McCord Air Force Base and Lockheed T-33 trainer diverted from an unrelated Air National Guard mission followed the flight. All three jets remained S flight patterns to stay behind the slow-moving flight and out of Dan's view. After takeoff, Dan told the flight attendant to lower the stairs. She told him and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Dan rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. She continued to express her fear to him and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. He said he would lower the stairs himself, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and the first class sections, and not return. Before she left, she begged him, please take the bomb with you. Dan responded that he would either disarm it or take it with him, and as she walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Dan standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From takeoff to when she entered the cockpit, 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed, and for the rest of the flight to Reno, she remained in the cockpit and was the last person to see Dan. At around 8 p.m., the cockpit warning light flashed, indicating that the staircase had been deployed, and the pilot used the plane's intercom to ask Dan if he needed assistance, but Dan's last message was a one-word reply, "No." The ears crew popped from the drop in air pressure from the stair being opened, and at approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section had suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to flight level. In his interview with the FBI, the pilot said sudden upward pitch occurred when the flight was near the rear suburbs of North Portland. With the cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if he was still on board. The flight attendant used the intercom to inform Dan they were approaching Reno and that he needed to raise the stairs so the airplane could land safely. She repeated her request as one of the pilots made the final approach to land, but neither the flight attendant nor the flight crew received a reply from Dan. At 11:02 p.m., with the staircase still deployed, the flight landed in Reno, and FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff deputies, and police established a perimeter around the aircraft, but feared the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, so they did not approach the plane. The pilots searched the cabin, confirmed that Dan was no longer on board, and after a 30-minute search, the FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. And in addition to 66 fingerprints aboard the plane, FBI agents recovered Dan's black clip-on tie, a tie clip, and two of the four parachutes, one of which had been opened and the other three shroud lines cut from the canopy. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno and developed a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents immediately began to question possible suspects. In a rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long of the Oregon Journal recorded the name Dan Cooper as D.B. Cooper. United Press International Wire Service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the error, the hijacker's pseudonym became D.B. Cooper. Acting on the possibility that the hijacker may have used his real name or the same alias as in a previous crime, Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper, and the Portland Cooper had a minor police record but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Due to the number of variables and perimeters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult, and the jet's airspeed estimated varied. The environmental conditions along with the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude. And only Dan knew how long he remained in free fall before pulling his ripcord. The flight pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. Black-clad man jumping into a moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. The pilots did not make visual contact with him. On December 6, 1971, 12 days after the incident, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force Blackbird to retrace and photograph the flight's flight path and attempt to locate the items that Dan carried during his jump. The flight to retrace that route was successful, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. In experimental recreation, flying the same aircraft used in the hijacking in the same flight configuration, FBI agents pushed around 200-pound sled out of an open air stair and were able to reproduce an upward motion of the tail section and a brief change in cabin pressure described by the flight crew at 8:13 p.m. Initial exploitations placed Dan's landing zone within an area of the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Area, Washington, near Lake Merwin, an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. Search efforts concentrated on Clark and Colwitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the largely forested terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also performed. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Dan nor any equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI, coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path and from Seattle to Reno, although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastics and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated. Nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Soon after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Colwitz counties for 18 days in March and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Exploration Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. A local woman stumbled upon a skeleton in an abandoned structure in Clark County. It was later identified as the remains of Barbara Ann Derry, a teenage girl who had been abducted and murdered several weeks before. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking, and based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Dan's drop zone was estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battle Ground, Washington to the south. In March 1972, after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines, the Air Force and the FBI determined that Dan probably jumped over the town of Le Center, Washington. In 2019, the FBI released a report detailing the burglary of a grocery store about 3 hours after Dan jumped near Heisen, Washington, and Heisen, an unincorporated community, was within the calculated drop zone Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. In the report, the FBI noted that the burglar took only survival items such as beef jerky and gloves. However, the report notes the burglar wore military-type boots with congregated sole, while Dan was described as wearing slip-on shoes. So, a month after the hijacking, the FBI distributed a list of ransom serial numbers to financial institutions, casinos, racetracks, businesses with routine transactions involving large amounts of cash, and law enforcement agencies around the world. Northwest Orient offered a reward of 15% of the recovered money to a maximum of $25,000. In early 1972, U.S. Attorney General John N. Mitchell released the serial numbers to the public. Two men used counterfeit $20 bills printed with Dan serial numbers to swindle $30,000 from a Newsweek reporter named Carl Fleming in exchange for an interview with a man they falsely claimed was the hijacker. In early 1973, with ransom money still missing, the Oregon Journal republished the serial numbers and offered $1,000 to the first person to turn in a ransom bill to the newspaper or any FBI field office. In Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer made a similar offer with a $5,000 reward. The offers remained in effect until Thanksgiving 1974, and though several near matches were reported, no genuine bills were found. In 1975, Northwest Orient insurer Global Indemnity Co. compiled with an order from the Minnesota Supreme Court and paid the airlines $180,000 claim on the ransom money. So this is one of the biggest unsolved robberies in American history, and they still have no idea who did it.
Huh. I have thoughts, but I'm curious on what you think.
What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure this guy was a pilot, but I don't think he was a pilot for the company he robbed. And I find it really interesting how he seemed unfamiliar with at least a part of the states. Because even if you're talking about Mississippi, you wouldn't say the country of Mississippi. Even if you're talking about the landscape, that's not really what they're known for. So that was weird for me.
Yeah.
And some of these other things make me think that he was a pilot based out of somewhere along the western area of the states, because he also knew a lot about what planes can or can't do, and flight speed and parachute operations and stuff like that, which on one end you could say, oh well, he could have been like a stunt jumper, or he could have been one of these things, but they only need to know those things up to a certain degree, and they would not know the physical limitations of a plane unless they themselves were either responsible for the operations of a plane or were a pilot. Because even a lot of pilots might not necessarily know what planes can or can't do outside of the operations of it. So, I think he was either a pilot or worked on planes. He said he stole the money as a grudge thing. I half think that this was him doing like a fuck the government sort of thing. And his intention was to rob them, but not necessarily for personal gain, especially if those bills have not turned up in circulation since then. So, to what reason would a man have to clearly plan this? Because he would have picked a night flight that had no moon, dressed the way that he did, and did the things the way that he did in a very particular way that to me screams big middle finger, especially if he didn't use the money afterwards or put it into circulation. And this was clearly very premeditated, and he knew enough things that the average person would not know. That's kind of what I think this is.
Well, to your point of, like, none of the ransom money was discovered, on February 10th, 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbian River at a beachfront known as Tina Bar, about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 20 miles southwest of Ariel. As he raked the sandy riverbank to build a campfire, he uncovered 3 packets of the ransom cash, totaling about $5,800. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements, but were still bound in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed the money was indeed a portion of the ransom, 2 packets of $120 bills each, and a third packet of 90, all arranged in the same order as when given to Dan.
Okay, so then my other thought then is, it's possible then that, so I still think in a way this was meant to read as a big middle finger, especially if he's not going to keep all of the funds with him. But then on the other hand too, what are the chances that he made stash caches that he planned on using later on, and something went wrong with his plan and he ended up dying in the wilderness somewhere?
Well, I'll read you this last bit that I had written down about his fate and, like, what people think, like, the most common theory is.
Cool. Okay.
So, from the beginning of their investigation, FBI agents did not believe Dan survived his jump. The FBI provided several reasons and facts to support their conclusion: Dan's apparent lack of skydiving experience, his lack of proper equipment for his jump and survival, the temperature and inclement weather of the night of the hijacking, the wooded terrain into which Dan jumped, his lack of knowledge of the landing area, and the unused ransom money. First, Dan appeared to lack necessary skydiving knowledge, skills, and experience for the type of jump he had attempted. The FBI agent said, "We originally thought Dan was an experienced jumper, perhaps even a paratrooper," saying, "We concluded a few years after this was simply not true. No experienced parachutist would have jumped into the pitch black night in the rain with 172 mile per hour wind in their face, wearing loafers and a trench coat. It is simply too risky." Alternatively, skydiving instructor Earl Cozy, who supplied the parachutes, testified that Dan would not have needed extensive experience to survive the jump, and anyone who had 6 or 7 practice jumps could accomplish this. However, Earl also noted jumping at night drastically increased the risk of injury, and without jump boots, Dan would probably have suffered severe ankle or leg injuries upon landing. Second, Dan did not appear to have the equipment necessary for either his jump or his survival in the wilderness. He failed to bring or request a helmet and jumped into negative 9 degrees Celsius wind at 10,000 feet in November over Washington without proper protection against extreme wind chill. Although the contents of Dan's paper bag are unknown, he did not use any of the bag's contents to assist him during any part of the hijacking, so the FBI speculated the bag contained items he needed for his jump, such as boots, gloves, and goggles. Third, Dan did not have an accomplice waiting on the ground to help him escape. Such an arrangement would have required both a precisely timed jump and the flight crew's cooperation to follow a predetermined flight path. But Dan did not give the flight crew a specific path. Moreover, the flight crew proposed, and Dan agreed, to alter the flight path and fly from Seattle to Reno for refueling. And Dan had no way of keeping an accomplice up to date on this change of plans. The low cloud cover and lack of visibility to ground further complicated Dan's ability to determine his location, establish a bearing, or see his landing zone. Finally, the ransom money was never spent, and the recovered portion was found unused. FBI said diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, and in such terrible conditions, he probably never even got his chute open. The FBI agent Richard Tosaw theorized Dan became incapacitated from hypothermia during his jump, landed in the Columbia River, and drowned. However, FBI agents were not unanimous in their assumptions of Dan's ultimate fate. A senior FBI agent anonymously op-eded in 1976 article in the Seattle Times, "I think Dan made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. It was a clear night. A lot of this country is pretty flat. He could have just walked out, right down the road. Hell, they weren't even looking for him there at the time. They thought he was somewhere else. He could have just walked down the road." Conclusive evidence of Dan's death has not been found, and in the months after his hijacking, 5 men attempted copycat hijackings, and all 5 survived their parachute escapes. The survival of the copycats, several of whom had circumstances and conditions similar to Dan's jump, forced FBI lead case agent Ralph Himmelspach to reevaluate his opinions and theories regarding Dan's chances for survival. Ralph cited 3 examples of hijackers who survived in conditions similar to Dan's escape: Martin McNally, Frederick Heinemann, and Richard LaPointe. Hijacker Martin McNally jumped only using a reverse chute without protective gear at night over Indiana, unlike Dan, who appeared to be familiar with parachutes. Martin had to be shown how to put on his own parachute. Additionally, Martin's pilot increased the airspeed to 320 knots, nearly twice the airspeed of Dan's flight at the time of his jump. The increased wind speed caused a violent jump for Martin. The money bag was immediately torn from him, and yet he landed unharmed except for some superficial scratches and bruises. 49-year-old Frederick hijacked a flight in Pennsylvania and survived after jumping at night into a jungle in Honduras. And a third copycat, Richard LaPointe, hijacked a flight in Nevada wearing only trousers, a shirt, and cowboy boots. And Richard jumped into the freezing January wind over northern Colorado and landed in the snow. In 2008, Frederick admitted that he originally thought Dan had only 50% chance of survival, but subsequently revised his assessment. By 1976, most published legal analysis concurred impending expiration of the statute of limitations for prosecution of the hijacker would make little difference. Since the statute's interpretation varies from case to case, from court to court, a prosecutor could argue Dan had forfeited legal immunity on any of several valid technical grounds. In November 1976, a Portland grand jury returned an indictment against John Doe, aka Dan Cooper, for air piracy and violation of the Hobbs Act. The indictment formally enabled prosecution to be continued should the hijacker be apprehended at any time in the future. So that's kind of where we're at. People really didn't think he survived, but then after a few copycats did it, they're like, maybe.
See, I disagree a little bit with the assessment that they had afterwards, because I don't think it necessarily takes stupidity or not knowing to do what he did. I think it just takes a certain level of desperation. And I think that if he knew enough as he did to even get into the situation that he was in, he probably knew his chances well enough and just decided to take them anyways.
Yeah.
And, I would say, is the possibility that he died after this, especially without the money being put into circulation? Sure, because why would you take that much money and not use it? Like I said, unless you're doing a big fuck you to the company for some reason. But then my thought too is that maybe he buried a part of the money then in that. So in the situation that this was a big fuck you and he never intended on using it in the first place, it wouldn't matter that the money went back into circulation. Him burying it would be him basically saying like, oh, this is where I landed, good luck, guys, right? Or even trying to build a situation where they can then surmise that maybe he did die, right? But then I think he would have survived anyways because he would be the only person who would have had that money. It doesn't just get underground magically anywhere. So for it to be, buried in a riverbank, that's very intentional. Mm-hmm. And I would say that I'm going to go and stick with my original assessment. I think this guy was a pilot. He might have just been a rural pilot. Like, I don't think he would have been a commercial pilot, like an international pilot. Because he knew enough about certain things that people generally wouldn't know, or maybe even a mechanic. I feel like he survived his jump, and I feel like the main point of his actions specifically, because also he brought up a grudge, and he was very kind to the air hostesses and the other passengers, and even the pilots, even considering the fact that he had a bomb. Right. I really feel like this had more to do with the airline itself and feeling like he got a one-up against them than it did anything else.
See, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I am kind of undecided on, like, motive, but I think personally, like, he was en route to Mexico. So, in my opinion, he probably landed somewhere near that riverbank, buried some of the money so people would think he was dead, and then headed to Mexico and is living his life.
Yeah, because they wouldn't be tracking U.S. dollars in Mexico, hey? Like, that would not be a thing, right?
I don't know. Like, I don't think so, but, like, who's to say? Like, where he's spending it. Like, maybe he's in a really small town where there's not a lot of other tourists. Because, like, what I could see is if he went to, like, Cancun and he's using, like, American dollars, that money might get back to the U.S. eventually, right?
Yeah, and then they'd find all in common with these people who are coming back. Oh, you were all in Mexico. Yeah.
But, like, if he's in some rural or small town in Mexico or even South America, like...
living simply. Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. I don't...
But I do agree with you that he was probably a pilot. Because everything he did where he was like, no, like, you can fly this way... That screams like he knows what he's talking about, because if I was doing this, I would have no idea how many knots they can go.
That's the thing. There's always the confidence of stupidity, because even dumb people can say things confidently, and other people, if they're confident enough, will believe that they're right. I think this goes a little beyond it, though, because something like that, where it's a function of a plane... It wouldn't really matter if you don't know how planes work. I don't think you could sit there with a certain level of confidence and be like, no, you can do this. Because if you didn't know, or you didn't have that confidence, that wouldn't have even come across as a question, because you wouldn't want to jeopardize your own safety. The point is for you to survive with the money. That's the point of a hijacking.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's a really interesting mystery, and I kind of hope that one day it gets solved. Like, not even so that he can be caught or whatever, just to, like, figure out what happened and how he got away with it.
Yeah, and then, too, like, if you can put a name to a character, like, especially in stuff like this, then you get to know a little bit more about, like, what did they do before this happened? What did they do after? Like, some of that stuff. Because that would be my thing. I'd be like, what do you even do after a hijacking like that? Like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, especially to not get caught. Like, that's pretty impressive, because most people get caught.
And he had to have been smart. Like, I do think he had a history of being a pilot. But I think on top of that, he was probably smarter than the average person for a lot of things.
I think to actually get away with a crime like that, you would have to be.
Right? There's just too many things to take into consideration. And I don't think he had a buddy on the ground who knew what he was up to. I think this was a solo operation.
I do too. Like, I agree with him there, where, like, it would be just too implausible. Like, with everything being up in the air, to have someone, like, waiting for him. Like, I don't think that was the case.
Up in the air. You're hilarious.
Ha 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 ha.
Yeah, but is there anything else you want to add before I do my closing notes?
No, that's the end of our episode today.
All right, guys. Well, you heard it here. If you like today's episode and you want to leave us a review, please feel free. You can leave a review onto wherever you're listening to our podcast nowadays. So that would be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. 5 stars is always appreciated, so we can reach out to more listeners just like you. Other than that, we have our website, which is www.wheelofcrime.com if you want to check us out on there. Our email, if you want to send us an email about the show, which is wheelofcrime@gmail.com. We have our social media, which is on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. We have our Patreon, which is Wheel of Crime at Patreon. And lastly, if you guys have listened to today's episode and you're like, oh my god, I know stuff about planes, or I have a plane story, or you know who the hijacker is, you could message into the show.
Or if you are the hijacker,
you could message into the show and get your feature on the next listener episode. I believe Jen has some scheduled here for the summertime coming up here. So soon, if you guys, like I said, listen, you have a story, you're running out of time. If you want to get a feature, you will have to write in and submit something to get your feature on the episode. Yep, get on it.
But yes, that's it. That's all. And we'll see you next week for another new episode. Okay, bye.
Bye.